Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our live event here. We have our colleagues here from Police Scotland joining us for this live event. I'm really delighted to welcome Chief Superintendent David Duncan and PC Stephanie Rose from Safer Communities team within Police Scotland. We're going to have just a short event today just to discuss and answer any questions regarding people's experiences of policing and the various issues that have been raised during COVID. So I'll hand over to Chief Superintendent David Duncan, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what your role is within Police Scotland and some of the issues that you're aware of.
Yes, thanks. Good afternoon. As you said, I'm Chief Superintendent within Safer Communities Division of Police Scotland, and our role is really all around engagement, partnerships and preventing crime and harm from occurring. So within that context, we've supported the sort of public health approach that's been taken by the Scottish Government to combat the coronavirus pandemic, and the police role within that is really supporting the legislative framework that's been put in place to try and contain the effects of the virus and limit the spread. So we've conducted a number of parts of the operational response to that, but a main part which Stephanie and I have played with in that is just that outreach and engagement with all of our communities.
Great, thank you. And PC Stephanie Rose, obviously we've spoken quite a few times throughout the pandemic, chatting through about some of the issues and some of the things that the autistic community and their families and that people have raised. So could you explain a little bit about what your role within Police Scotland is and some of the things that we've talked about over the last wee while?
Yeah, so I work for Chief Superintendent Duncan within the Safer Communities Department, and as he said, a large part of what I've been doing over the last few months is engaging with our partner agencies and asking for feedback, asking to find out what people's experiences are, both in terms of day-to-day life and kind of trying to adhere to the conditions that are upon us all at the moment, but also identifying how people are engaging with the police in the local areas and if there's anything that we can do better, or identifying things we do well so we can make sure that continues. So as you say, we've chatted quite a few times. There is some concerns that have been raised from autistic people in the communities with regards to how they themselves individually adhere to the guidance and the legislation. And so it's important that we have information that goes out to the public, which we've done through some reassurance messages that we've circulated, both on our social media and through partners like yourself. But we've also been really important to make sure our own staff are aware of how to deliver the best service we can when engaging with autistic people. So we've also put some advice out to our own staff as well. So that's some of the things that we've been working on over the last few months.
Yeah, because I think it's been probably one of the most challenging events in anybody's lives, and particularly for some of the disability community and particularly the autistic community. And as you say, we've been chatting backwards and forwards about some of the experiences that people have been having, right back at the beginning of the pandemic. Obviously the restrictions in terms of our free movement and where we could go, and then obviously the recognition that for some individuals that was just impossible to adhere to, and that for their own mental health and for their well-being, being able to go outside and take exercise more than once a day was essential to their well-being. And and obviously we had the change in the guidance to do with that, and we spoke at the very beginning about some of the police responses to individuals, and we had a really beautiful example of some officers that had spoken to a young parent and a child in one of the parks in Glasgow, and they were asking, saying, why does your child want to come outside, climbing the trees and things like that, and really taking that opportunity to learn from the autistic child and his mum about what his needs were and why he would need that. And it was just such a lovely example, and really ties back to the work that you guys are doing in terms of raising that understanding and awareness amongst police officers that we all have different needs and different things that we want to happen. So I suppose bringing us into the present, if you like, and we do have the kind of situation that's is evolving around the use of face coverings in shops and public transport. And obviously the guidance then changed again to include some more indoor spaces like cinemas and museums just there, prior to the weekend. I myself was at Edinburgh Castle at the weekend there, and everybody in general had their face covering on while they were moving around that space. But obviously we understand, for some people that wearing a face covering is just not possible because of the amount of distress that it causes. And it's just something that's not that person's not able to do. And you and I, Stephanie, have spoken a lot around about how individuals are approached when they're visiting supermarkets, and maybe so, you must wear a face mask, and there's a lot of signage up to say you must wear a face mask. And we've talked about interactions with the public and with the supermarket staff and things like that. Around how the individuals are treated. So I suppose one of the questions that I have, if I was visiting a supermarket and I was prevented access because I wasn't wearing a face covering, where do I stand with that? Can that be enforced in that way, or is there another way that could be approached? What would be your advice on that?
So do you want me to start?
Yeah.
We've had a lot of questions about face coverings and about people's rights and the exemptions. Our kind of Chief Constable's approach has always been about people taking individual responsibility for their own behaviours. And if everybody focuses in on their kind of own circumstances, so if you can wear a face mask, do that. But if people have an exemption and they have the right not to wear the face mask because of a disability or other reason, then they should be able to safely go about their business and their lives. I think very much at the start there was a real issue with people getting refused entry to shops on a frequent basis. I've certainly noticed going about my own life that shops are displaying a lot more information about exemptions and playing over the tannoys a lot of information about discouraging other customers from challenging people who aren't wearing face coverings because they may have an exemption and a lot of disabilities are hidden. So in the first instance, we would ask people to raise that with the shop and with the shop staff. It's a failure to kind of provide that service to a disabled person. So that would come under the Equality Act. However, we chatted a little bit about how they're challenged, and if they're abused in any way, if they're made to feel fearful or they're targeted in any way, then certainly that would be a matter for the police, and we would encourage people to contact the police and report incidents like that.
Mm-hmm. So what would be the best way for an individual to do that? Is it about contacting your local office? Is it calling a general number? What would be that? I think for some people there might be that uncertainty about what's the urgency to this, and then to speak to a police officer, but what's the best way of getting in touch with somebody?
Yeah, there's always a little bit of confusion between what is an emergency and what's not an emergency. And so obviously in an emergency you'd be using the 999 services. An emergency is if you feel you need the police as soon as possible because your safety is at risk or the risk of another person's safety. If you don't feel you need the police as quickly as possible, then you would use our non-emergency services. I could list all the different contact methods. There's so many. We're trying desperately to make sure we're adding more accessible contact methods as time goes on. So yeah, you can phone. If you have any issues with speech, you can use the 999 text service. If you're a British Sign Language user, you can use the Contact Scotland BSL service for contacting through 101. So there's lots of different ways. If you felt more comfortable attending a police office, then that's what you could do. So there's a list on our website of all the different ways you can contact police, and the reason there's so many different options is for people to be able to pick what's most comfortable for them and what's right in those circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's really great, because that's one of the things, we certainly experience, not everybody feels confident and comfortable picking up the phone. You might want to try and contact in a different way. So we'll certainly signpost as well to that place on your website, so that, we're sort of showing that pathway through, so people can explore what the best way to get in contact with the police for them is. Chief Superintendent, did you want to add anything to that there?
No, I think the only thing I would add is that we are seeing very high levels of compliance with the legislation. So enforcement activity by the police has been very low in the circumstances. So the vast majority of the public, I would say, are entirely on board with why the guidelines and legislation are in place. And for the minority of people who might not agree with it or take a biased approach to those with hidden disabilities, for instance, then I would hope that they will, when challenged, change their attitudes, and that's part of our kind of engagement approach. So sometimes it's a matter of explaining to people or raising people's awareness. However, where abuse is taking place, then that's absolutely something that we would encourage reporting along the lines that Stephanie's described. There's absolutely no place for hate crime.
I think people will feel reassured that there's a pathway to making people aware that this is happening, that people are feeling challenged. We've had stories of families who visited the same shop for many years, and then the exemption has come in, and they've maybe not been able to access that as freely as they were before, and that causes distress and anxiety and difficulty for people. So it's great that there is mechanisms in place to address some of that, because as you say, there isn't any place for that kind of negativity towards individuals. So we talked a little bit about the exemptions there, and we've spoken about how people approach to explain, I'm not wearing a face covering because I'm exempt, and the Scottish Government did publish guidance stating who fell into that guidance criteria, and recommended that people either carry an alert card, or the sunflower lanyard is really quite a well-known thing that people use. But what we've been experiencing is a number of people who have had the alert card, and we ourselves have our own alert card that people can download from our website and put onto their smartphone, or we can send them a paper copy, or that do wear the sunflower lanyard and still finding difficulty in accessing public spaces, either it not being recognised, or shops saying and public spaces saying, well, I'm sorry, but the legislation or the guidance, if you like, because the two sometimes do get a little bit muddled, says no, sorry, everyone must wear a face covering. So what can people do in that sort of circumstance?
So we put the guidance we put out to our police officers that we spoke about earlier, highlighted sunflower lanyards, other lanyards that are available that say that people are exempt, alert cards. That's absolutely the person's individual right and choice to carry something that identifies their disability or exemption. They're not obligated to do that, they don't have to do it, but if they choose to do it and they show it to a police officer, then the police officer will take that into consideration when delivering a service to that person. If you're talking more about the shops and the public transport, then again, we would ask that you highlight that there's no obligation on you to prove your exemption. We are hopeful that the vast majority of people who don't have exemptions will adhere to, and as Mr. Duncan said, we are seeing a high level of compliance amongst the general public. So if the vast majority of people are complying, then it should be a very small amount of people that have exemptions or that aren't wearing the face coverings. So we would again ask you to highlight that to the shop staff, ask the senior manager, or take note of the transport details, whether it's a bus or train or whatever. And then all these companies have systems that you can put in concerns to. And you can also, if you feel that you have to escalate it, go to your local authority and ask them about putting out further guidance. It's about education, and the more people are told about, you know, the exemptions, and people don't have to prove a disability, the more that information gets out. As I say, I'm hearing more and more when I'm out and about, tannoy messages and seeing more posters that I wasn't seeing a few weeks ago. So hopeful that continuous education will improve, you know, the ability for people to go about their daily lives.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We've had a question here from Peter saying, what can be done to encourage retailers of whatever size to display information about the wearing of face coverings, but also information about the exemption as a way that will help, as you say, more people to understand that there are people that have an exemption. And I completely agree with you. I've noticed in the last couple of days some of the tannoy announcements in some of the public spaces are sort of saying, you know, please be mindful, please be kind, please be patient. But what can be done, I suppose, from a policing perspective, in terms of raising awareness around about why somebody might be exempt, and what can we do to support supermarkets in this?
So I'll kind of kick off and answer there. So we do work with partners in the retail sector, and as Stephanie's mentioned, local authorities and trading standards departments. So they are quite an active partner in terms of helping to raise awareness, and the police effort within that would be to play an appropriate role, so assisting with pushing out the messages, which is a proportionate message around you know, the fact that somebody has physical, mental illness or an impairment or a disability is one of the specific exemptions, but there's absolutely no onus on that individual to carry some form of identity card which justifies that. So what we're trying to do is support, I suppose, the public sector effort to work with the private sector and retailers to make sure that message is as widespread as it can be.
Yeah, that is the key, isn't it? It's just getting all that messaging out there, getting that information out there, and supporting, as you say, retailers to embed that in what's happening. I just want to read a comment here from Elizabeth that I think really illustrates some of the experiences that individuals were having. She says here, and thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing your experience. It really sounds awful what has happened in this situation, and I hope that you were able to get help and support and report what's happened here. And you know, Stephanie has outlined some of the ways in which you can access support to report this type of incident that happens. But she says here that she has been the victim of abuse from a member of the public for not wearing a face covering. She is also a wheelchair user, and the lady pulled the cable mechanism out of the wheelchair so that this lady could no longer operate her wheelchair. And the attitude that she felt from this particular individual was really quite horrible, and that she was made to feel like she was using her disability as an excuse. And again, you know, thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing your experience there. And you know, things like this, as we have discussed in the past, these are not isolated incidents. These are not just one or two things that happen. So again, you know, and the comments underneath it, thankfully, saying, you know, let's raise awareness, let's report this type of abuse so that you know, it can be challenged, and you know, we as a society can say, no, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. So in terms of you know, we spoke a little bit around you know, if you're sort of challenged, I suppose, by in a public space by you know, somebody who's employed. But what about to do with members of the public? Because, you know, sometimes when that happens, you probably feel a little bit uncertain about who do you go to, and maybe the shock and the upset of it. It's really quite a horrific thing to go through. So in situations like that, what would be the best way of this particular incident being reported? What support would be in place to report a crime like that?
Yes, so I think there's a distinction between situations where a member of the public might legitimately challenge somebody else who appears to be breaching the guidance or the legislation, and then that is dealt with by a reasonable explanation and understanding by that member of the public that somebody has a disability. I think it's completely different where you've got a clear situation where a crime's been committed, as that situation would appear at face value. So again, we would encourage anyone who feels victimised by somebody else, and that goes way beyond legitimate challenge or civic duty, to uphold elements of the guidance where it's clearly a crime or an incident that's caused great distress. Then that should be reported to the police. And again, Stephanie has outlined the various ways that we have made available in which people can report to us.
I wonder if it's possible there, if you could explain what the term legitimate challenge means.
Yeah, so I suppose what the general encouragement to the public is everybody is encouraged to comply with the guidance and the legislation that's issued. So what the scenario I'm thinking of would be, if somebody goes into a shop and isn't wearing a face covering, then I suppose it's legitimate for a shop staff member to ask questions about that. But if on balance there is a legitimate reason for that, including hidden disability, then our awareness raising is trying to get people to understand that is a legitimate reason for not wearing a face covering where it would cause distress.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Sorry, can I just add in there, Joanna?
Yeah, of course, please.
Yeah, just saying, you don't have to, again, as we've said, just to re-emphasise the points we've made earlier, you don't have to prove your disability or go into long details. There was a lot of chat at the start about whether you should have a letter from your doctor. Under no circumstances should you be forced to talk about your personal circumstances, any disabilities or conditions that you have. You can, calmly explain to the staff member that, I have an exemption. And if you choose then to show a lanyard or a card, then that's your decision and that's your personal choice. In regards to what happened to Elizabeth, it sounds horrendous and absolutely would be something the police would want to know about. And I'd be keen to know if Elizabeth did report it at the time. And if there's any issues and she requires any support to make that report, then obviously we can speak at the end of the event and see if there's any support that she requires to do that.
Thank you. That's and likewise, Elizabeth, if you would like to get in contact with one of the advisors on our advice line, and I'm sure the team that are working in the background here will post up contact details for the advice line, and we can put you in touch with the relevant people to support you to report this if you haven't felt comfortable to do beforehand. Lots and lots of questions about, what can we do to really sort of drive forward that agenda of inclusivity and acceptance and understanding and an awareness. And Stephanie, you spoke about at the beginning there when you were talking a little bit about what some of your role is. What are some of the things that Police Scotland are doing in terms of trying to support awareness and understanding, both within the community but also within Police Scotland themselves?
So education is key, I think, both ways. So educating our officers and staff on, autism and hidden disabilities and some of the things they can do to provide a good service to people. giving advice around communication, etc. So education for our own staff, but it's also important we get education and information out to the public. And we need to consider how we do that, making sure it's accessible, making sure it's in forums that people can find it when they want that. So how do you make a report to the police? When should I be reporting that to the shop staff, and when should I be reporting that to the police? And if it feels wrong and it feels like you've been targeted and you've been abused and you've been made to feel fearful, then that's a good indicator that absolutely should be the police that you can contact, particularly if you feel like the shop or the transport staff haven't helped you. But I think, education is absolutely key. We officers are trained annually on autism awareness. We're looking to update that training to make it more current, and we're working with autism organisations like yourself and a group of young people with autism down in Inverclyde at Reach for Autism as well.
Yeah.
So it's really important that people with autism are included in the design and development of information that we're putting out, and training materials.
Great stuff. I say lots of questions coming through now. Just to sort of cover off a few before we finish up this afternoon. Again, general theme around acceptance and understanding and awareness, and again some really quite disappointing experiences that some people have had. We had somebody here who was visiting a local retailer. And there was a sign up saying, you must wear a face covering in here. If you're not able to do that, then please don't come in. Now, absolutely understand there may be some other context around that, but again, is this the type of thing that Police Scotland need to and want to know about?
I suppose where people are having these experiences, then these should be flagged. So local authorities or the police, where there's a need for us to become involved, then we'd be interested to hear that. But I mean, retailers need to balance their responsibilities under the coronavirus regulations with not discriminating against people who need an essential service during very difficult times. So again, I think, as Stephanie said earlier, education is the key to this, and trying to get the proportionate messages consistent throughout the kind of retail sector. And again, it is very disappointing if certain individuals are applying a blanket approach to something which is a bit more complex than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of moving us away from face coverings and that sort of part of it, because obviously, the policing response has gone right across, COVID, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, right from, when we were talking about exercise, when we're starting to all come back out again. Well, one of the other parts of this that we've certainly heard some individuals feeling anxious about is the track and trace system. And we have one comment here, I'm going to have to move it a bit closer, from Franatello. I hope I'm saying your name correctly there. Just saying that they're particularly concerned about the track and trace system and being asked to stay inside for 14 days, even if you haven't had direct contact with a particular individual. For example, that you might have been in a cafe on the same day as that particular individual. She just wants, I suppose, more clarity, and again, this might be something that we might have to go away and find out the answer to, and come back to you on, around about those individuals who, as we spoke about, require to leave their houses for exercise, and would have, with that guidance, have been able to leave their house more than once a day to take exercise. Is that still the case under the track and trace system? If they are asked to self-isolate for 14 days, would that guidance still apply to them in terms of, yes, you can leave your house more than once a day?
So the track and trace system is part of the Public Health Scotland response, and obviously it's there to try and contain the virus. However, as we've kind of said throughout the conversation, there's a proportionality to that. So it's not asking people to sit and suffer unnecessarily within their addresses. So there are provisions within those particular guidelines which determine how much freedom you have, even if you are self-quarantining due to track and trace or coming back from another jurisdiction.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, that seems to be all of the questions that we've been asked today. However, we've had somebody just highlight here, thanks to Police Scotland. This is from Peter, saying thanks to Police Scotland for producing this, and he has signposted to the video that was produced, explaining some of the exemptions with the BSL sign language attached to that as well. So I think that's a really positive note for us to end on. Thank you again, PC Stephanie Rose and Chief Superintendent David Duncan for joining us today and for answering some of those questions. If we have missed your question, apologies, they're all sort of flying here. One of the team at Scottish Autism will get back to you, and if we can't answer it, then obviously we will pass it on to our colleagues as well. As you say, we work very closely with Police Scotland, and our intention is to continue that partnership going forward in this. So once again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we'll look forward to welcoming you again to another live event in the future. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.